Chapter 5 of Unfortunate Citizen. The barracks of the guard were alive and panicked in a way that they had never been. While Cecilia had precious few memories of the insurrection which took her father when she was only 4, General Capone had told her of what it was like for the soldiers. The insurrection had been initially celebrated by the guard as a chance to finally do something, whereas this day was one of terror and anticipation of horror. That old battle, known as the insurrection or the Sicilian Civil War, took place over only 5 days. An alliance of farmers and others who lived in the countryside came together and attempted to declare independence from the authority of the royal family. They placed roadblocks on the highway which ran through their territory and began charging toll to anyone passing through. In an effort to maintain the unity of the city with solely peaceful means, the King of Sicily, Cecilia's father, went to the insurrectionists alone to discuss the situation and bring an end. His good faith was terribly taken advantage of, and the insurrectionists killed him at the roadblock marking the edge of their territory closest to the city. Here, many spectators had already gathered to witness the drama unfold and were horrified to see a rifle round blow open the head of the king. It was at that moment that the war began, and things moved very quickly. At this time, the guard was only 50 troops, and they were scattered about on police duty in the city. In the time it took to assemble the whole force, smaller teams came into the territory of the insurrectionists to get a foothold that could be used to launch further attacks. The entire contested region was only 3 by 5 miles, but with such a limited force it was an enormous challenge. General Capone, at the time under the title of Chief of Police, organized an additional 100 volunteers and militia to hunt down pockets of insurrectionist forces. In 3 days, every rebel had been discovered, killed in battle, or executed at their moment of capture. The entire ordeal had made for a very dramatic shift in the course of Sicily's politics as opposed to those of Florence. While Florence struggled with the beginning of democratic sentiments at the time, Sicily had seen the king martyred by Democrats. As power waned from the royal family of Florence, the Sicilian royalty saw unanimous support and fervor that never faded in the time between the Civil War and the day that the guard prepared once again for battle. The princess had not changed out of her uniform since the night before, but she did not care if she smelled or not. Only one thing pressed on her mind, and it was preparing for a battle with an unknown enemy. Her pack, filled with ammo, dry food, and steel water bottles, was beginning to weigh a great deal. It was without a moment's hesitation that she packed away a poncho and stakes of her own. In a time of crisis, there was not a moment to spare for propriety, and was such that she no longer cared about sharing a tent with one of her soldiers. A soldier ran into the supply room where she was given a final check over her pack, and he delivered a report. "Princess, the stables are prepared to see the men off." "Excellent. Saddled and bagged?" she asked. "Yes, and I have a team of volunteers moving the extra supplies you asked for to the saddlebags." It was with an idea that the battle would carry on longer than a single afternoon that the princess had given the order to prepare every man a horse with supplies for a week. "Good. Now get yourself ready." "Already done, ma'am. I'll be reporting to my sergeant now." Cecilia nodded, and he ran out as quickly as he came. He had on his pack, and his rifle was shouldered. At his side was the revolver that every member of the guard was issued for performing police work. Cecilia, lacking a side arm of her own, had already taken one from the armory. She may have had a special long gun, but if she was to be forced into a situation at close range, she would have no advantage over her men. Leaving, she found that the barracks hall lined with bunks was empty but pristine. Beds made, floor swept, and everything clean. Even in a moment of dire circumstance, the guard had immense pride for their title. The princess ran out of the barracks, across the courtyard of the guard fort located adjacent to her family's palace, and to the stables. Here was the largest collection of horses anywhere on the planet, and it was a beautiful sight. Mismatched and of every color, they were all excellent riders, specially raised for their role in the guard. The tenders of the stable had been terribly rushed to saddle up over 200 horses, but had done so dutifully. They smiled to greet the princess as she entered, and in just a moment a horse had already been led to her. A beautiful chocolate color, the horse stood not much taller than the princess herself. The saddlebags were loaded, and the bridling was ready for her to take control of the steed. "Thank you for your service to Sicily," she said, somewhat formally to the girl who brought her the horse. She was maybe 15, and it made the princess wonder what she was doing working at the stables at such an early hour in the morning. "Of course, princess. We love you like everyone does, even when you're more soldier than princess." I believe that one can be both, she said, and with no further comment, she pulled herself onto the horse. And damn good ones at that, called a voice just behind Cecilia. Sarah came up to the side of the horse, and reached her hands up to find Cecilia's, grasped firmly, yet Cecilia thought she could feel a tremor in them. Thank you, the princess said quietly. Sarah kissed Cecilia's hand very formally, a gesture rarely made by the people of Sicily. Because Cecilia stayed so close to the people, their relationship was more relaxed, but the gesture touched Cecilia. Please, for the city, for the people, for me, and for yourself, please don't die, pleaded Sarah in a timid voice. For you and for every citizen, you are my greatest friend, and I expect to see you again soon, to celebrate our victory. The short speech, just a few seconds long, was enough for Sarah to let go and turn to leave. Cecilia said nothing more and guided her horse away and down the path between the stalls. The exit at the end of the long building led to a parade field that was an open place in the city park. When she exited, Cecilia could see a flawless arrangement of all 200 soldiers in a formation 10 men deep and 20 men wide. They looked to the princess, emotionless and dignified. Without warning, a call was given by a lieutenant in the front of the 5 platoons of 40, and all 200 men drew their sabers from the sheaths hanging at their sides. Raised into the rising morning sun, they shone brilliantly and pointed to the west, the direction of Florence. Feeling moved by the show of patriotism and loyalty, Cecilia found a place directly in front of the army and stood in her stirrups to quickly address the men. You all know I love you. I know all your faces and most of your names, but even then I have asked you to do something which you are free to walk away from. This is open rebellion, open war, and as such you are not a coward for leaving me to my own work. I have already offered, and not one of you have left, but just know that this is the last opportunity. You have had your chance, and from here on there will be no desertion. May God bless us all, and I pray that this is miraculously ended before a shot can be fired. The men lowered their sabers and replaced them to their sheaths. The sound, assembled from hundreds of smaller ones, was deafening. Just before the princess could issue the final order to move out according to the battle plan she had developed with the lieutenants, the general's steam car came around the stable and into the courtyard. It stopped beside the princess, and the general himself stepped out from the driver's seat. Abandoned by your own driver, you coward? Asked the princess. Rage oozed from the general as he stepped around the engine compartment of the car and came up next to Cecilia in her saddle. She towered over the man and looked down with disdain. When asked who his allegiance fell to, he said it fell to the legal ruler of Sicily. This being the queen, and her being a coward herself, the general had refused to send the guard to meet the Florentines in battle. Loving the princess much more than this career man, who had long lost his sense of duty to the city, the guard had chosen to follow her as their new general. Now they stood and watched as the old general looked on Cecilia with trembling rage, but above all, terror. You don't know what you're getting into. Forget stealing my men and breaking the law. You have no clue what you're getting into. The fight for survival, she said, looking away from him to the army before her. A fight for your and your men's lives survival. That is all this is. A fool's errand into something you are so far from prepared for. I'm not commenting on your intelligence or leadership. Those are admittedly capable. But the strength of your enemy is insurmountable. Impossible. We're more well equipped and trained than any other army on the planet, Cecilia said with gallant defiance. The general, defeated, looked to the ground and held his words for a moment. Once he looked again at the princess, she could see tears in his eyes. Just promise me something, Cecilia dear, he said in an entirely different tone. She now saw the man who had filled the role of her father over the last 15 years of anguish and longing after she had lost her own. What is it? She asked sheepishly, once again feeling like a little girl. That feeling turned to anger as she remembered the uniform, weapon, horse, and leadership she had with her now. Promise me that you will retreat if you cannot win, not to surrender, but to fight and live on. A fighting retreat to sustain the war is always preferable to a brave and suicidal final charge. This had taken her by surprise, because until now she really didn't expect the Florentines to truly be a great challenge to her highly motivated and well-coordinated force. What did he know that he wasn't telling her? She asked him just that. I don't know, but from what the general who was here said, they are not to be reckoned with by anyone. They claim to be better prepared than anyone on Europa. Well, I will take your advice because I don't believe this will be a single battle. It will be a proper war, and believe me when I say that I will not be bested without first dying honorably." The general turned away and got back into his car and left, crying. He loved her like his own daughters, and he now really did expect her to die. It's the end to chapter 5 of Unfortunate Citizen.